We've got some breaking news now. Our political editor, Andrew Clennell, on whether other apologies have been granted by Scott Morrison. What do you know about that, Andrew?
Kieran, what I can tell you is that Scott Morrison, as well as having to be prompted to apologise to Karen Andrews and saying at the press conference yesterday that he'd apologised to the colleagues whose portfolios he'd shadowed, if you like, hasn't apologised to either the former Industry Minister, Christian Porter, who was caught up in this, or to Angus Taylor, the former Energy Minister. So I think what we can take from that is that he was concentrating on those who were calling him and questioning it, Matthias Cormann and Josh Frydenberg, in terms of his apologies. Now, having said that, I believe Angus Taylor's not really fussed with an apology. He doesn't feel he needs one. He didn't know that Morrison had kind of taken charge of his department as well, but I guess Morrison argues he didn't take any actions in relation to this. Christian Porter I spoke about earlier in the program. This is an interesting study. As Attorney General, he advised Morrison he could do this in terms of health at the peak of the pandemic. And that's when Scott Morrison did it. And my understanding is that Scott Morrison said, OK, the Biosecurity Act, declaring a biosecurity emergency, it's a lot of power in one person's hands, the Health Minister. How do I delegate it to Cabinet? Is there a way to delegate it to Cabinet? Christian Porter came back then and said, well, you can't delegate it to Cabinet, but you can use an administrative instrument in order to swear yourself in as well as Prime Minister. That's what Scott Morrison did. Ironically, that's about decentralising power. Then without Porter's knowledge, Morrison put in a number of steps over 2 years to centralise power, not in the spirit of Porter's advice at the time. So anyway, Anthony Albanese made the point today. He thought the apology for the secrecy around this was owed to the Australian people, not Mr Morrison's colleagues.
The issue isn't whether an apology is being given to Mr Frydenberg or Karen Andrews or others. The issue is that the apology is owed to the Australian people. It's the Australian people who were kept completely in the dark with this shadow government operating, and it's the Australian people who had their democracy that they hold dear undermined by the activities of the former coalition government.
Now, we know Karen Andrews has called on Scott Morrison to resign from Parliament over this. She was Home Affairs Minister. She's Shadow Home Affairs Minister now. She revealed to Peter Stefanovic this morning she hadn't been apologised to when she was asked, and Peter Dutton was quick to say Morrison should apologise, and then that happened.
Has Scott Morrison called you to apologise?
No, but look, I understand that he's made a broad apology to his colleagues, and I'm entirely fine with that. So it's not an issue with me.
Most of it's out there now. People are making their judgments, and obviously the Prime Minister's taken the political opportunity. He sounded more like an opposition leader than a Prime Minister in the last couple of days. I mean, borderline hysterical, but my colleagues are rightly angry and aggrieved, and I understand that. And Karen's expressed that publicly and again today, and I understand their frustration. And Scott has made the wrong call. He's apologised for it, and if he hasn't spoken to Karen, then I believe he should.
Now, it's unclear why former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, a year after he swore himself into the health and finance portfolios, did so for Home Affairs and Treasury in May 2021. Hardly the height of the pandemic then. I don't think there was much COVID in Australia, although obviously it came in again later. But Karen Andrews did reveal that they'd had some robust discussions, the Prime Minister and her. And interestingly, it was only a month after she'd taken on the Home Affairs role that this move by Morrison was made.
What were the robust discussions that you had with him about?
Oh, well, they could have been over a range of things. We had some fairly robust discussions about manufacturing at the days that I was putting together the manufacturing a strategy. I wanted more money than I ultimately got.
Now, the Prime Minister's up in the Torres Strait at Thursday Island today. A lot of consultations on The Voice, and he's responded to some of the critiques of his proposal.
I think John Howard addressed the press club today, didn't he? And he's a bit of a critic of this Voice proposal. And I think you can see there again that this is a very difficult task for Anthony Albanese to pull off. He might have some media backing that he's chasing on this, but if the opposition opposes it, and Peter Dutton's of the same mind of John Howard, referendums in Australia, traditionally you need bipartisan support. But he's saying here, well, John Howard, he wouldn't even go for the apology. He's not what we should look for in terms of the ideal government approach, is government to reconciliation, and putting the case again, the voice is advice to Parliament. Parliament is sovereign in its own right. Once this is through, there should be a change in the Constitution so Aboriginal people have more of a say in policy, but they can't force policy.
The government, it's very clear that the government remains sovereign, and the voice has an advisory role only. And I'd say to Mr. Howard, look at the details. And just as the apology to the stolen generations that was delayed for a long period of time, brought the nation together and strengthened the nation, a voice to Parliament enshrined in our Constitution will also strengthen the nation and bring it together. And with respect to John Howard, I don't think that overwhelmingly that I would regard his government as a model for how to advance reconciliation in this country.
The Prime Minister there on Thursday Island. Andrew, a massive week. We'll see you Sunday. You're speaking to the Prime Minister on Sunday Agenda. Andrew Clennell interviewing Prime Minister Albanese. I'll be interviewing Peter Malinauskas, the South Australian Premier. So a big show this Sunday. We'll see you then.